I was reborn after being betrayed by the people I trusted most. Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone you love and suddenly realized they were never truly with you? That they smiled, they nodded, they said the right things, but deep down they had already walked away? That moment doesn't come with fireworks. It comes quietly, like a slow breath caught in your chest. And when it hits, it feels like the whole world tilts just slightly, enough for everything you thought was stable to begin slipping. This is not a story about heartbreak. Not really. This is a story about what comes after. After the betrayal, after the silence, after the people you trusted most leave you standing alone in the wreckage. It's about rebuilding when no one shows up with bricks. About finding strength you didn't know you had because you had no other choice. It's about how I lost my marriage, my closest friend, and even a sibling I once would have given my last breath for. And how somehow, through all of it, I found something I'd never truly known before, myself. If you've ever been betrayed by someone who shared your last name, your bed, your childhood, or your dreams, this story is for you. It won't be easy to hear. But if you stay with me, I promise you'll walk away not just seen but stronger. Because this isn't the end. It's the beginning. And mine started with a phone call on a Tuesday morning. It was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. My daughter had just graduated from college with honors, the first in our family to do so. I had spent weeks planning the celebration dinner. Handwritten place cards. Her favorite wine. A private dining room at a beautiful restaurant with string lights that sparkled like stars. Everyone was there, my husband, our closest friends, family, even my sister who flew in from out of state. I remember glancing around the room as the waitstaff poured champagne. I was holding Amelia's hand, smiling as she laughed with her college friends. The music was soft, the mood warm. For a fleeting moment I felt proud. I felt complete. And then Gregory, my husband of 28 years, stood up. I thought he was going to toast our daughter. That's what he was supposed to do. Instead, he raised his glass and said, "I've decided to start a new life without you." Just like that. No warning. No build-up. Just the sound of 50 forks clinking against porcelain, frozen midair. Conversations died in an instant. All eyes turned to me, waiting for the explosion, the tears, the screaming match. I didn't give it to them. I smiled. Calm. Collected. I'd rehearsed this in my mind for weeks. Not the setting, not the moment, but the possibility. I knew this man. And more importantly, I knew what he was capable of. Because the truth is, this moment didn't start in that restaurant. It started 6 months earlier, when I saw a strange transaction in our joint account. Just a few $100s, labeled consultation. It didn't raise a red flag at first. Gregory had always been the dreamer, chasing projects that never panned out. But something about the frequency of those withdrawals caught my eye. Something about the timestamps. Something about the fact that he was home less and present even less than that. I didn't want to believe it. You never do when it's someone you've loved for nearly 3 decades. So I rationalized. I explained it away. He's stressed, I told myself. This is just a phase. But the truth had been sitting right there in the bank statements. It was in the way he stopped asking how my day was. It was in the way he always tilted his phone away from me when texting. It was in the awkward silence when I walked into a room and our friends were mid-conversation, too quick to change the subject. That night in the restaurant wasn't a betrayal. It was a reveal. The final crack in a wall I'd been pretending wasn't crumbling. And as I sat there in a room full of people I once called mine, I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. Not because Gregory announced he was leaving, but because I could see in the eyes of everyone around me, they already knew. The friend who used to call me every morning? She looked down at her plate. The neighbor who'd known us for 20 years? He avoided eye contact. Even my sister, my own blood, shifted uncomfortably, like this wasn't her place. In that moment I didn't cry, but something inside me broke. And here's the thing they don't tell you about betrayal. It's not just about the person who hurts you. It's about all the others who stood silently and let it happen. They say hindsight is 20/20th. And I used to hate that phrase, until I realized how painfully true it is. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. But when you love someone, especially someone you've built a life with, your mind doesn't search for betrayal. It searches for reassurance. You don't think, he's hiding something. You think, he's probably just tired. The red flags in my life weren't waving in the wind. They were whispered, small, quiet changes I brushed off again and again. It started with the way Gregory stopped asking me to join his weekend plans. He used to love our Saturday brunch tradition. Then slowly it turned into, I'm meeting up with the guys. Or, it's just a work thing, nothing major. I'd nod and smile, telling myself that couples need independence, right? Then came the phone, always face down, always clutched just a little too tightly. Notifications silenced. Calls answered in the other room. When I asked, his tone would shift. You don't trust me now? And I'd feel guilty, like I'd accused him of a crime for simply being curious. Red flag. But here's the tricky part about love. When you've spent years building something with someone, you want it to work so badly that you become your own greatest manipulator. You start filling in blanks with kindness. You start softening every blow with empathy. You rewrite the story in your head because the truth feels too sharp to touch. And it's not just romantic partners we do this for. I had a best friend, let's call her Jenna. We'd known each other since college. She was the first person I called when I got engaged, when I gave birth, when I got my promotion. We were inseparable. Until the day she told me she couldn't make it to Amelia's graduation dinner because of a prior commitment. Turns out that commitment was a spa weekend with my husband and a few other friends. They called it Gregory's early birthday getaway. I called it betrayal. But again, I saw the signs before that. The way Jenna would go quiet when I mentioned Gregory's name. How she'd suddenly change the subject when I talked about issues in my marriage. How she stopped sharing things with me and started sharing them with him. I missed it. Or maybe deep down I didn't want to see it. Because seeing it meant I had to do something. And doing something meant admitting things were broken. That's the real reason we miss red flags, isn't it? Not because we're blind, but because we're afraid. Afraid of losing what feels familiar. Afraid of the silence that comes after confrontation. Afraid of being alone. So we silence our instincts. We doubt our gut. We trade clarity for comfort. And comfort, as I learned, can be the most dangerous illusion of all. Let me be clear. If something feels off, it usually is. If someone makes you feel like you're too sensitive for noticing a pattern, that's not connection, that's gaslighting. Trust isn't just about believing someone else. It's about believing yourself. I wish I had listened to the voice inside me sooner. The one that whispered, this isn't right. The one that tugged at my heart every time Gregory came home late without explanation. The one that hesitated when Jenna hugged me a little too tightly, then asked a little too many questions about our finances. But the past is done. And if you're watching this, maybe you're still in it. Maybe your gut is whispering right now. So I want to say something you might need to hear. You're not crazy. You're not dramatic. You're not overthinking. You're just seeing clearly for the first time. There are certain days that get burned into your memory, not because they were loud or dramatic, but because they were quietly devastating. For me, that day was a Wednesday. It was raining. Not a thunderstorm. Not a dramatic downpour. Just that steady gray drizzle that makes the world feel heavier somehow. I had just gotten off a call from my doctor. Routine checkup, nothing serious. Until she mentioned some concerning test results that would require further scans. It wasn't life-threatening, but it was enough to scare me. Enough to make me sit on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, feeling like the ground beneath me had cracked just a little. I picked up the phone and did what anyone would do. I reached out. I called Gregory first. No answer. I texted him. Hey, can you call me when you're free? Something came up. Nothing. Hours passed. Then I called Jenna. Voicemail. Again. I tried my sister. I'd love to talk, she said. But I have back-to-back meetings. Can I call you tomorrow? That was the moment it clicked. Not because no one answered immediately, life happens, people get busy. But because I realized I no longer had that one person. The one who would drop everything, no questions asked. The one who would sit with me, even in silence, until I stopped shaking. I had always been that person for others. But in my moment of need, there was no one. I sat in my car outside the grocery store that evening, still in work clothes, listening to the rain tap against the windshield. I watched families walk past, laughing, carrying bags, arguing over what ice cream to buy. And I felt invisible. Not just alone. Unseen. The truth is, when your world starts falling apart, most people don't notice. They're too busy living their own lives. And even the ones who do notice, sometimes they choose to look away. Because your pain is inconvenient. Your vulnerability is uncomfortable. Your truth doesn't fit the version of you they prefer. I thought of all the birthdays I'd planned, the hospital visits I'd made, the late-night phone calls I'd answered when they needed someone. And it hurt. Not just the silence, but the absence of effort. I remember whispering out loud like a question meant for no one. Where is everybody? And that's when it hit me. No one was coming. Not because I didn't matter, but because I had trained them over years and years that I didn't need anything. I was the strong one, the responsible one, the fixer, the listener, the one who had it all together. And somewhere along the way I had become so good at showing up for everyone else, that no one thought to show up for me. That day broke something open in me. Not in a way that made me angry, at least not yet. Broke me open, not down. Like a window crack, just enough to let something new in. I went home. I made tea. I sat by the window and cried. Not just for the medical scare, but for the years I had poured into people who didn't know how to pour back. For the kind of love that was always one-sided. For the realization that I had mistaken being needed for being valued. And when the tears stopped, I made a promise to myself. Never again would I build my life around people who disappear when I'm quiet. Never again would I beg for presents. Never again would I be the last person I take care of. That day taught me something no book or therapist ever could. Being alone is hard, but realizing you've been lonely for years, while surrounded by people, is harder. I didn't sleep much that night. After the tears dried and the house went quiet, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, turning one question over in my mind. What now? Because that's the fork in the road no one prepares you for. When you've been hurt deeply deliberately, you stand at a crossroads. And the signs pointing toward revenge? They are loud, flashing, tempting. It would have been easy, honestly, to gather all the receipts, to call out every lie, to confront Gregory at his workplace, to message Jenna's husband, to air every truth that had been buried for years. I fantasized about it, about watching their faces crumble, about taking back the power I felt had been stolen from me. But here's the thing about revenge, it feels like justice. Until it doesn't. Until you realize it ties you to the very people and pain you're trying to escape. Lying there in the dark, I asked myself a different question. What would it look like to choose myself instead? Not just in theory. Not just on a Pinterest quote. But in practice. What would it look like to stop trying to prove a point to people who had already decided who I was or wasn't to them? What would it mean to let go of the fight entirely? Not out of weakness, but because I was finally tired of bleeding for people who wouldn't even hand me a bandage. The next morning, I opened a journal I hadn't touched in years. I wrote down 2 columns. One side said, "Get even." The other, "Get free." Under "Get even," I wrote down everything I could do. Expose, embarrass, cut ties in public, reclaim the last word. Under "Get free," I wrote, "Start therapy. Rest. Call your aunt. Eat something green. Make a financial plan. Relearn who you are." The second list was shorter, but it felt quieter, stronger, like it was whispering, "Come home." I chose that path. And let me be honest with you, it didn't feel satisfying at first. There was no dramatic explosion, no standing ovation. No one clapped when I decided not to retaliate. Healing is quiet. It happens in the small moments no one sees. Choosing not to text back, deleting the angry email, stepping outside for fresh air instead of spiraling. But over time, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. Not just because I was letting go of the need to hurt someone back, but because I was finally reclaiming something far more precious than revenge. My peace. I started therapy that week. I journaled every morning, sometimes just a sentence, sometimes a scream written in ink. I made a list of small things I'd stopped doing, things I used to love. Walking barefoot on the grass, singing in the car, buying flowers for no reason. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not Gregory. Not Jenna. Not the circle of friends that quietly drifted away when things got messy. This time I was building something that didn't need to be posted, approved, or validated. I was building me. And the more I rebuilt in silence, the more I realized something essential. They had taken pieces of my life, but they hadn't taken me. I was still here. Still breathing. Still capable of joy, of laughter, of fierce love. even if I had to learn how to give it to myself first. So no, I didn't get even. I got better. I got clearer. I got free. And that freedom, it opened a door to something I hadn't even known I was missing. A life built not around who stayed, but around who I chose to become. Freedom, I learned, is both beautiful and terrifying. There's a strange silence that follows when you finally cut the strings that tied you to people who no longer serve your peace. It's the kind of silence that echoes louder than noise. First, it felt like loss. A deep hollow ache. Like walking through your own home and realizing half the furniture is missing. But slowly that silence became space. And space, when honored, becomes possibility. I wasn't just grieving the betrayal anymore. I was grieving the future I thought I'd have with the people who were supposed to grow old with me. The image of holidays with Jenna's family. The vision of growing old with Gregory, arguing over thermostat settings and mismatched socks. Even my sister, our bond once unshakable, now felt frayed, too delicate to lean on. I used to think love meant permanence. But what no one tells you is that some relationships are seasonal. Some are there to teach you something, not to stay. So I had to ask myself, who am I now that I'm no longer someone's wife? Someone's best friend? Someone's reliable sister? It's a scary question, but also a liberating one. Because what you discover when the noise fades and the old roles fall away is that you are not just who you are to others. You are someone on your own. I started doing things that felt uncomfortable at first. I went to brunch alone. I took a weekend trip by myself to a cabin in the mountains, where no one knew my name. I deleted old contacts that I used to scroll through in the dark, hoping one day they'd reach out. I stopped begging the past to explain itself. And the more I sat in the discomfort, the more I began to feel again. Not just sadness or anger, but small unexpected joys. Like the thrill of rearranging my living room at midnight. Like discovering I actually love Thai food even though Gregory used to hate it. Like the warmth of a solo morning walk without having to explain where I'm going. I began creating routines that belonged only to me. Monday evenings were for therapy and reflection. Wednesdays I tried a new recipe, most of them failed but it felt like mine. Fridays became my don't talk to anyone night. Just a blanket, a journal, and a movie I'd already seen 10 times. And somewhere in between all those small, quiet rituals, I found peace. But let me be clear. Building a new life doesn't mean pretending the old one didn't matter. Some mornings I still missed them. Sometimes I'd hear a song and remember driving with Jenna, windows down, yelling lyrics like we owned the world. There were nights I looked at the side of the bed Gregory used to sleep on and felt a tug I couldn't quite name. That's part of healing too. Missing the people you thought would be there forever, even after you've accepted they won't. You don't have to erase the past to move forward. You just have to stop trying to live in it. I didn't replace the people I lost. I redefined what connection looked like. I started making room for new relationships, ones built on mutual respect, not obligation. I met a woman in a book club who'd been through something similar. We bonded over bitter coffee and too many tears. She's now one of my closest friends. I reconnected with my aunt, who I'd lost touch with over the years. And most importantly, I reconnected with me. And perhaps the greatest shift of all? I stopped fearing being alone. Because once you learn how to stand on your own, once you build a life that doesn't depend on someone else to feel complete, you stop accepting half-love from people who only show up when it's convenient. That's the life I started building, brick by brick, softly but firmly. And from that foundation, something even more unexpected began to rise. Purpose I never saw coming. I used to think setting boundaries was something people did when they were angry, that it was a harsh final move, a wall, a confrontation. I thought it meant pushing people away, that it sounded cold. But when you've been broken open, not by a single act of betrayal, but by years of slowly abandoning your own needs, you learn the truth. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors. And for the first time in my life, I had to learn how to close the ones that led to pain, and open the ones that led back to me. I didn't grow up with the language of boundaries. Like many people, especially women, I was taught to be agreeable, to not make things awkward, to avoid conflict, to say yes with a smile, to take on more, to carry it quietly, to fix everything without asking for anything in return. It's no wonder then that people got used to crossing my lines. I never drew them. But healing I've found doesn't just come from reflection. comes from redefinition. And the first step was redefining what I would no longer tolerate. So I started small. I stopped answering texts right away. I let phone calls go to voicemail when I wasn't emotionally available. I began saying no, not because I had to give a reason, but because no is a complete sentence. First, it felt unnatural. I worried people would think I was rude, selfish, distant. And some of them did. But here's what surprised me most. The people who truly loved me adjusted. They respected it. Some even said, "I'm glad you're doing this. You've given too much for too long." The ones who got upset? They weren't upset because I was hurting them. They were upset because my boundaries were interrupting their comfort. And that's when I understood something that changed everything. People don't get angry when you set boundaries. They get angry when your boundaries expose the fact they've been benefiting from your lack of them. One of the hardest boundaries I had to set was with my own sister. We had always had a complicated relationship. Love buried under old resentments, childhood dynamics, and years of unresolved tension. After the fallout with Gregory and Jenna, I tried to lean on her. But her response was lukewarm at best. She was kind but distant. Supportive in words but never in presence. One day, after yet another vague, maybe next week text, I called her and said gently, "I love you. I always will. But I need more from the people in my life now. And it's okay if you're not in a place to give that. I just need to be honest about where I am." She didn't respond for a long time. But later that night she called back. And for the first time in years we had a real conversation. That's what boundaries do. They filter what's real from what's routine. They force clarity. And clarity, even when it's painful, is a gift. I also had to set boundaries with myself. To stop replaying the past like a highlight reel of regret. To stop shrinking myself in new relationships, waiting for the next betrayal. To stop earning love like it was a performance. I started asking myself before saying yes to anything, is this costing me peace? If the answer was yes, I walked away. Boundaries aren't about control. They're about clarity. They tell the world and yourself, this is where I end, and where someone else begins. And for someone who spent decades being everything to everyone, learning to say, this is enough, wasn't rejection. It was reclamation. Setting boundaries helped me protect my peace. But there was still one thread pulling at me, a quieter betrayal that lingered long after the apologies, after the friends disappeared, after the door had closed on Gregory for good. Money. It's not the most romantic topic. It's not what people post about when they talk about heartbreak or rebuilding. But the truth is, financial betrayal cuts deeper than we admit. Because money isn't just numbers. It's trust. It's time. It's sacrifice. It's the overtime hours you worked while someone else spent freely. It's the savings you thought were for us, used for her. It's the retirement you planned for together, stolen without your consent. And that's exactly what happened to me. Started small, just like everything else. A few unexplained withdrawals from our joint account. Gregory always had a new project, a new next big thing. So I didn't ask questions at first. I told myself he deserved a little freedom, that I didn't need to micromanage. After all, wasn't trust part of a healthy marriage? But then the withdrawals became transfers. From our shared account to one I didn't recognize. Regular. Patterned. Hidden, and just enough vague descriptions to look harmless, until they weren't. First I felt foolish. How could I, a woman who had worked in finance for over a decade, miss something so obvious? But that's what financial betrayal does. It hides in the places you thought were safest. I began investigating quietly. I pulled months of statements, compared dates, traced amounts. The more I looked, the more sick I felt. Gregory hadn't just lied about the money. He'd redirected it. To gifts. To dinners. To deposits on a beachfront property. All connected to her. All while telling me, we need to tighten up for retirement. And let's skip a vacation this year. He watched me make coffee at home instead of going out, thinking I was being responsible. He watched me sell old furniture online to save for Amelia's graduation. And he said nothing. That silence, that, to me, was the loudest betrayal of all. Because when someone steals your trust, your heart can recover. But when they steal your effort, the hours you worked, the dreams you planned, the sacrifices you made, it shakes your sense of security in a different way. I remember staring at the spreadsheet one night, fists clenched, thinking, he took everything. And then a new thought came, almost like a whisper. But he doesn't have to keep it. That's when the anger became action. I met with a lawyer. Quietly. Methodically. I documented every transfer. I found the prenup. The one he had insisted on when I had more money than he did. And I discovered something remarkable. It contained a fidelity clause that was still enforceable. He had tried to outsmart me financially. But in the end it was my carefulness, my planning, my own quiet strength that protected me. When the judge ruled in my favor, freezing the accounts, awarding me the house, upholding the agreement, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt grounded. Not because I'd won, but because for the first time in a long time I felt like the world had said, you were right to fight for yourself. But regaining control didn't stop at the courtroom. It had to continue in my mindset. Because I'd realized something important. Money is power. And for too long I had handed that power over, not just to Gregory, but to the idea that someone else should handle it. I decided to never again make myself small in financial conversations. To never again say, whatever you think is best, just to avoid discomfort. To never again let love silence my questions. And that's when something inside me shifted from broken to capable. I took a portion of my settlement and rented a small office space downtown. There I began something new. A financial consultancy for women in transition. Divorce, widowhood, job loss, sudden independence. It wasn't just a business. It was a mission. I wanted to help other women see what I hadn't been taught. That knowing your numbers isn't about control. It's about freedom. That you don't have to be wealthy to be financially powerful. You just have to know your worth and guard it like you would your child. Today, when I look at my bank account, it's not just about the numbers. It's about the woman behind them. The one who refuses to be caught off guard again. The one who learned that being generous doesn't mean being blind. The one who took betrayal and turned it into a blueprint. I didn't just get my money back. I got my voice back. And that was priceless. Taking back control of my finances gave me stability. But it didn't shield me from something just as jarring. Something no courtroom or spreadsheet could prepare me for. Becoming the villain in someone else's story. I remember the first time it happened. A mutual friend, someone Gregory and I had known for years, called me out of the blue, her voice tight and awkward. I don't want to get involved, she said. But Gregory told us you froze his accounts without warning. That you blindsided him. There was a pause. He's really struggling, Bianca. He says you've changed. And just like that I realized, my silence was being rewritten. My boundaries were being spun into cruelty. My strength was being repackaged as bitterness. Could have explained. I could have pulled out the receipts, literally and figuratively. But I didn't. Because here's the hard truth about reclaiming your life. Not everyone wants to hear your side of the story. Some people are more comfortable with the version of you that stayed quiet, that absorbed the tension, that smoothed over the mess. When you shift, when you start asking for better, expecting more, or simply walking away, you break their narrative. And they don't like it. It's easier sometimes to make you the problem. It wasn't just Gregory. Jenna, my former best friend, told people I had pushed her away. That I was jealous. Controlling. Too intense. My sister told a cousin I had become hard to talk to. Ever since the fallout. First it hurt. Deeply. I wanted to defend myself. To sit every person down and say, let me tell you everything, the real story. The betrayal, the silence, the slow unraveling of who I was just to keep others comfortable. But I learned quickly, people believe what serves them. And trying to control that will only exhaust you. So I made peace with something else instead. I don't need to be the hero in their story. I just need to be the hero in mine. Because here's the thing, I know what I lived through. I know what it took to wake up in the mornings when my world had collapsed. To walk into courtrooms alone. To rebuild a business from nothing. To parent through pain without passing it down. No one else has to understand that for it to be true. Still, some days the judgment felt louder than the truth. Especially in small social circles. The sideways glances. The polite, I heard what happened. The subtle unfollows online. It's like grief, but no one brings you flowers. Just quiet distance and unspoken blame. I started shrinking again, not in my actions but in my thoughts. Questioning, was I too harsh? Was I too firm? Should I have softened the blow? And then one night, after a long day of client calls and no energy to cook, I opened my fridge to cold takeout and sat on the floor, back against the cabinet. It hit me. I had been strong for everyone else. Again. And here I was doubting myself for the crime of self-preservation. I opened my journal and wrote one sentence. You don't have to apologize for surviving. That became my compass. Because when you decide to protect your peace, you will inevitably disappoint people who were benefiting from your lack of boundaries. When you stop explaining every decision, you become threatening to those who only valued your compliance. And when you start living in full truth, no mask, no filter, you become disruptive in rooms where pretense was the language. But here's what I know now. I would rather be misunderstood for living in truth than praised for living a lie. So if you've been labeled cold, too much, ungrateful, or changed, maybe that's not a sign you're wrong. Maybe it's proof you've grown. Villains are only villains in someone else's version of the story. In your own story, you might just be the one who finally broke the cycle. So let them talk. Let them twist. Let them write their scripts. You write your own ending. And if you need a reminder of who you are, just look at how far you've come from the version of yourself who stayed quiet, stayed small, stayed sad. You didn't just survive. You stepped into your life fully, even when it cost you the approval of people you once thought you couldn't live without. And that's not villainy. That's victory. Once I stopped chasing explanations and started choosing peace, something unexpected happened. I had space. Not just in my calendar or my home, but in my mind. In my chest. In that part of me that used to ache all the time without words to describe it. And in that space, something began to grow. It started quietly. A message from a former coworker saying, I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry. I'm going through something similar. Could we talk? Then another, this time from a friend of a friend. My sister's going through a divorce. She's scared about money. Would you mind helping her understand what to expect? First, I hesitated. I wasn't sure I was the right person to offer anything. I was still figuring things out myself. But the more I listened to these women, the more I realized they weren't looking for perfection. They were looking for someone who had been there, who had walked through the fire and made it out with their soul intact. Someone who didn't just survive, but understood. That's when it hit me. Maybe the reason I went through what I did wasn't just to rebuild my own life, but to help others do the same. So I started small. I hosted a coffee meetup at a local cafe. Just me and 3 other women who had all left long-term marriages. We shared stories, laughed a little, cried a lot. We talked about money, boundaries, custody, dating, the shame, the freedom, and the bizarre in between. It felt sacred. After that first gathering, I knew this was more than just conversation. This was healing. Not just mine, ours. So I made it official. I filed for a business license and opened a consultancy. Caldwell Financial Transitions. I used my experience in finance, and everything I'd learned the hard way, to help other women find solid ground again. Not just numbers on a spreadsheet, but real guidance. A how to understand what a prenup actually protects. A how to track hidden financial abuse. A how to budget post-divorce without shrinking your entire life. A how to start over without starting from scratch. Within 3 months, I had more clients than I could handle alone. Some came for practical help. Others came just to be heard by someone who wouldn't say, "At least he didn't hit you." Or, "It's been 6 months, aren't you over it yet?" I created the space I wish I had when my world first collapsed. A space where women could show up messy, confused, angry, relieved, terrified, all of it. And instead of being judged, they were met with something powerful. Understanding. Because the truth is, when you've lost everything you thought defined you, marriage, status, social circles, you don't need someone to fix you. You need someone to remind you. You're not broken. You're becoming. What surprised me most was how this work didn't drain me. It filled me. Every workshop I ran, every one-on-one session I led, every woman who left my office just a little straighter, a little more confident, a little more clear, they weren't just clients. They were mirrors. Reminders of how far I'd come. Proof that pain doesn't have to be the end of the story. Evidence that purpose isn't something you find. It's something you build brick by brick from the ruins. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single note. "Thank you for showing me how to believe in myself again." No signature. Just a quiet message that landed like thunder in my chest. That's when I knew. This wasn't just a new chapter. This was the reason I'd survived the last one. Because pain when left unprocessed becomes bitterness. But pain when held with care, when shared, spoken, and transformed becomes purpose. Today, I don't introduce myself as divorced. I say, I help women rebuild their lives after betrayal. Because I've lived it. And I believe you don't have to stay broken just because someone else didn't know how to hold your heart. And if that makes me a little too bold for some, good. I didn't come this far to be palatable. I came to be useful. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is still and the soft hum of the refrigerator is the only sound, I find myself staring at the ceiling and asking a question I never say out loud. If he hadn't left, would I have stayed? It's an uncomfortable thought. Not because I miss him. I don't. But because I know the answer. Yes, I would have stayed. I would have kept folding his laundry, kept ignoring the quiet hurt, kept telling myself that loyalty mattered more than fulfillment, kept trading little pieces of myself for the illusion of stability, because that's what we do, isn't it? We stay. For the family. For the image. For the memories. For the person we hoped they would go back to being. We stay because walking away feels like failure. Because starting over feels impossible. Because being alone feels like a punishment instead of a promise. That question, would I have stayed? It doesn't haunt me anymore. But it reminds me. It reminds me that not all endings are chosen. Sometimes they're given to us like cracked doors just wide enough to slip through if we're brave enough to stop pushing against them. It reminds me that pain isn't always the enemy. Sometimes it's the invitation. I used to think survival looked like resilience, showing up, powering through, keeping things together no matter the cost. But now I know that real strength sometimes looks like surrender. Like finally saying, I deserve more than this. Even if no one claps. Even if no one agrees. Even if the life you imagined has to burn down before you build the one that's real. These days my life is quieter. But it's mine. I don't perform happiness for anyone anymore. I don't shrink myself to make others comfortable. I don't chase closure from people who left doors open. Instead I build. I write. I walk barefoot in the grass and dance to music in my kitchen and say no without guilt. I love without losing myself. I rest without needing to earn it. And I've stopped asking why people hurt me. That question will never lead to peace. Instead I ask, what did I learn? And more importantly, who did I become because of it? Because if betrayal broke me, it also built me. If silence wounded me, it also taught me how to listen to myself. If loss stripped me bare, it also gave me space to grow new things. Would I have stayed? Yes. But I'm so grateful I didn't have to. And maybe if you're watching this, you're still at that crossroads. Still holding on to someone or some version of yourself that no longer fits. Still wondering if walking away makes you weak. Still waiting for permission. Let this be it. Let this be your reminder that leaving isn't the end of love. Sometimes it's the beginning of self-respect. That starting over isn't failure. It's the most courageous form of honesty. And that choosing yourself over and over unapologetically will never be selfish. It will be the bravest thing you ever do. So no, I wouldn't go back. Not because it wasn't real. Not because it didn't matter. But because I've finally learned what it means to matter to myself. And from where I stand now, not bitter, not broken, just awake, I can tell you this with all the clarity I didn't have back then. I didn't just survive. I rebuilt. And I don't need anyone's permission to say, that is more than enough. If you're still here, thank you. Thank you for sitting with this story. For holding space for the messy, the painful, and the quietly powerful moments. And now I want to hear your story. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you once thought you'd never live without? Have you ever rebuilt after a betrayal? Or are you still in the middle of the rubble, trying to figure out which way is forward? Drop your story in the comments. You never know who might need to read your words, or who might reply, same here. And if this video spoke to something deep in you, please share it with someone who might be in the middle of their own storm. Sometimes we don't need advice. We just need to know we're not alone. If you'd like more stories like this of growth, grit, and getting free, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. We go deeper here together. Because healing isn't a destination. It's a practice. And every time we choose ourselves, every time we speak truth, set boundaries, and walk away from what breaks us, we become a little more whole. Until next time, take care of your heart. You deserve peace. You always have.